thank you all for joining us today. My name is Casey Gwynn. I'm the president of Alliance for Hope International, and we're very honored to have you with us today in an esteemed panel that's going to be sharing with us as we dialogue on the intersection of faith and domestic violence. There are instructions on your screen that provide information about sending in questions to this webinar, and of course to eventually accessing this webinar, which will be downloaded to our online resource library at familyjusticecenter.com or .org within 48 hours of this webinar being broadcast across the country. And there will be an evaluation after you've listened to it, and we appreciate your feedback. Next slide. My guests on our webinar today on the intersection of faith and domestic violence include Dr. Oliver Williams, Elizabeth Peterson, Dr. Andy Johnson, and LaDonna Marie Combs. We're very excited to have each of them joining us today as we go forward in this conversation, a crucial conversation in our work with victims of intimate partner violence across the United States. Next slide. As I said, my name is Casey Gwynn. I serve as the president of Alliance for Hope International in a shared leadership structure with our CEO, Gail Strack. And we're very honored to lead a team of more than 30 now doing work in all of our various programs across the United States and around the world. Our particular focus today, of course, is going to be on domestic violence, but the work that we do connects to sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, and human trafficking. And now more and more a whole area around what we call polyvictimization and this whole notion of trauma and violence and abuse over the course of a lifetime, not just in adulthood, not just in childhood, but in all of it. So it's a great honor to be able to host this today and to be with you all. Next slide. We do want to especially thank Laura Rogers and our program manager, Kevin Sweeney, at the Office on Violence Against Women. We are honored to serve as the technical assistance provider for the U.S. Department of Justice for family justice centers and multi-agency collaboratives across the United States that receive federal funding. OVW has been a significant partner of our work all the way back into the 1990s, since the Violence Against Women Act office was created in 1995. And we certainly appreciate our ongoing partnership with them, now pushing into more than 25 years. We always like to give a shout out to our team at Alliance for Hope International. When we do webinars, even though you don't see most of our team on the webinars, there are a lot of people behind the scenes that are doing work in all of our various programs. We particularly appreciate some of our newest additions to our team, which include Dr. Chan Hellman, who's the head of our research team. Chan is the director of the Hope Research Center at the University of Oklahoma. Jim Henderson, who is an MSW, who's done a lot of work in the probation and parole arena, who is now working on our team, supporting our work around offender accountability and talking about the role that we need to play in training police officers and prosecutors and parole and probation and batters intervention programs in working with those who have chosen to use violence and abuse against other human beings. And we also appreciate the support of Dr. Bill Smock, who's our national medical director and works very closely with our Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention and other programs specifically focused on traumatic brain injury and concussive impacts and anoxic events and the kinds of short and long-term health implications of domestic violence and sexual assault in the lives of so many survivors that we support in our programs and centers across the United States. We're very honored today to have four presenters with us. Dr. Oliver Williams, who is a professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. Oliver, many of you know on this call that have been in the Family Justice Center world, was the executive director of the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American community. Oliver served in that role for more than 22 years, and he has worked with us for at least 25 years now, and it's been a great honor to see Oliver's work, both in the prisoner reentry arena, in the batters intervention world, and of course in the faith community work that he has done over the years as a clinical practitioner and as a national speaker and trainer. In 2018, Dr. Williams received our Lifetime Achievement Award at Alliance for Hope International that recognized the incredible esteem we hold him in for his lifetime body of work. So we're very honored to have Oliver with us. Elizabeth Peterson is also joining us, who's a PhD candidate at the Department of Religion and Theology at the University of the Western Cape. She has her master's degree in social work and has been doing work around gender-based violence and abuse since the 1990s, and has done both direct services and writing and training. She established the South African Faith and Family Institute in 2008 with the intention of creating a coordinated restorative justice response to domestic violence, with a particular focus on the capacity of the faith community to engage in that journey and be part of it. So we're very honored to have Elizabeth with us. Dr. Andy Johnson teaches at Bethel University in Minnesota in the undergraduate program in psychology, has done a great deal of research, and we're very honored to have him joining us as well. Andy's on the board of the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence and serves as the co-chair-elect of the Education and Mentoring Action Team. He has done a lot of work in this area and has given a lot of thought to this topic, so we appreciate Andy joining us as well in this really significant conversation around the relationship between gender-based violence and religion, culture, race, national origin, immigration status, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And then finally, LaDonna Marie Combs is joining us. She's the president and CEO of the Sisters Against Abuse Society, which is a nonprofit organization that brings hope, help, and healing to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault in the Black and African American community. She's an adjunct professor of psychology at Spring Harbor University in Spring Harbor, Michigan, and has done a great deal of writing and thinking in all of this work, both in direct services and in the training and outreach arena. In May of 2019, she was voted Woman of the Year, part of the Women of the Year group by the Michigan Chronicle newspaper for her work in the city of Detroit. She has her master's degree in organizational management and has been a minister with the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World for more than 30 years. So we appreciate each of you joining us today, particularly because of your passion around this issue, around the intersection of faith and domestic violence. I will say that many, many years ago, when I began this work, I was born and raised in a Christian home, and this was not a topic of conversation. My father grew up in a violent and abusive home. He perpetrated some of that violence on his children. I don't believe he ever abused my mother physically, but this became a very personal topic to me when I became a prosecutor and had to realize that the sins of the parents are visited upon the children to the third and the fourth generation. And yet, that cycle can be broken. And the church can take a stand, and the faith community can take a stand, and we can stand for respect and equality, and we can stand for nonviolence and take a position that can change families in this country and around the world. So, on behalf of Alliance for Hope International, thank you all for joining us, and it's my great honor to turn it over to Dr. Oliver Williams. Oliver, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Casey. I have to tell you that it's an honor to continue to be associated with you, and it was an honor to be a part of Alliance for Hope and the great work that you've been doing to address many issues for women and children who are affected by domestic violence. So I just want to say that on the outset. Next slide, please. So I want to give us an idea of what we're going to discuss today. One is, why consider faith in addressing intimate partner violence, or another term would be gender-based violence. So I've seen people who are from different cultural groups across the United States that are immigrants and refugee or citizens in the United States who are involved in trying to address this set of issues. And Andy has as well, and I think LaDonna and clearly Elizabeth has focused on the issue with different groups. And globally, the term gender-based violence is one that's equivalent to intimate partner violence. So we'll go GBV or IPV as terms that we'll try to utilize throughout the presentation. But why should we consider faith in addressing it? And the other thing I wanted to cover is what is the rationale of some faith leaders about including IPV or gender-based violence among the various ministries. So there's some faith leaders that address the issue. They have many ministries. It's not just intimate partner violence or just talking about faith. But what they do is that they have many ministries like health, substance abuse. I had a chance to talk to a friend of mine that my mother used to be his mentor. And he had a substance abuse problem. And I asked him what were the things that were had evolved over the years. He said, back when I was using drugs, one of the things that was interesting is that they didn't have a faith-based ministry at all. What they had was you'd come and you get your spiritual self aligned and straight, but you didn't cover other types of things. And people oftentimes need to be able to address different issues that influence their life. What I've liked about the ministers and practitioners and scholars that have been doing the work is the fact that they deal with the intersection by examining what faith texts have to say about the issue. And that gives us guidance about how God thinks about this set of issues and gives us guidance and better interpretation of what the faith texts have to say about addressing intimate partner violence. So one of the things that I can look at is the issue about Ephesians 5:22. And I know LaDonna is going to get a chance to talk briefly about that, but I'll come back to that in a minute. And the next thing that we want to cover is what does the literature tell us about faith and GBV? Andy's going to cover that bit for us and sort of explore that to know what the literature has to say. And I recently got an article that's in press now that focused on the study that we did, and Andy and I are going to be working on a study that's including multiple faiths here in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. And among the other things that we're going to cover is Minister LaDonna Combs, who has a story of faith and in shelter program, and in addition to some other things, but to talk about the significance of addressing those issues and the work that that I know I've covered and Elizabeth will be able to talk about it as well, is working not only with faith leaders, but also working with women and men of faith in exploring the issue and trying to get a sense of, why should we pay attention to this and the meaning that it has for different people. And I've seen her work. I've been to South Africa and seen her wonderful work. And so we'll get a chance to sort of explore that. She's going to do a good job with that. Next slide, please. So observations of churches that include domestic violence or in their work. And if we took a look at them, what's interesting to me is that they review their faith texts. So I mentioned Ephesians 5:22. It said, women, submit yourselves to your husbands. And I've heard a number of conservative ministers make the comment, but they don't consider verses that are below or verses that are follow. And it also says, submit yourselves to one another as you would unto the Lord. It also talks about the fact that a man should treat his partner as he treat himself. And in one version of the Bible that I read, it also said, and only a fool would hurt himself. So that doesn't also set the context of what relationships should be in terms of male and female interaction with each other, in terms of it being collaborative. And it's not an issue about domination. And that's something that I thought was interesting. The other thing is that they see the contradictions in the faith interpretations and in the faith texts. And what they do is that they explore, but they also want to get it right and be able to preach to both. Because if you only preach to men about domination, you also create a crisis of faith for women. who go there in good faith to try to be enriched as well. But also in terms of practice and what they should be doing in the home towards treating their partner in a way that God intended. The other thing is the fact that these ministers preach about it not just on at certain points or not at all. They preach about it, but they preach about it in sermons, on the day that people gather. And I'm not just talking about in Christian faith, as Elizabeth will talk about. There's several other faiths that we'll notice, and Andy will have some comment about that as well. But there are multiple faiths that look at their faith tradition and they have conversations about it among their parishioners. The other thing that I thought was sort of interesting about different faith leaders that we've interacted with and that we see that are doing this work is that they've been trained about domestic violence and how to respond to the issue of intimate partner violence. So it's not something that is new to them. I think of Bishop Roderick Mitchell that's in Cleveland, Mississippi. And he's won several awards for the work that he's done to try to address this issue. He's got a rape crisis line in his church. And he also trains lay people in his church to not only be able to hear what victims are trying to say to him and say to the people in the church that listen, but also to be able to respond to it as well. And that's something that's important. We've spoken to battered women who are women of faith. Some of them had left the church. And they left the church because they didn't have someone who was able to listen to them and then respond to the issues that they had. So they left the church. They got bad, and this is historically an issue too, they got bad information from their faith leaders. And they felt responsible for his behavior, for the abusive person's behavior. And they left the church. And many of them rejoined when they found people that could hear their testimony about victimization, but also give them clearer guidance about where to go. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned to you earlier, some faith leaders interpret their faith text with more accuracy about what it's stated and the directions that they offer with regard to violence and abuse. And they sort of examine their faith traditions, but what they do is they see stories. It's been interesting to me that the older I became, we found people who were willing to have those conversations to point out different information in the faith text to be able to give better direction on how to think and how to behave, to the point where I just revised the Evolve curriculum that are using in Connecticut, and there are two sections in there. One that focuses on Christian males who are abusive and what the Bible tells us about that, but also with a imam who has been able to examine what the Quran has to say and give men directions on how to respond to that. And what was interesting is both in Christianity and in Islam, there is a discussion about how one needs to behave differently towards their partner when there is conflict and when there's anger, and gives men directions on how to respond. But as a person growing up in the church, one of the things that I thought was also interesting is that I didn't hear those things when I was growing up. But yet my grandmother and my mother were people who were, you couldn't have better women of faith who were connected. But there was this issue about listening to male direction rather than listening to women's wisdom. And so women had wisdom as well. And so it's not bashing the church. I'm still a person who's involved in the church as well as my wife, Sonia. But what's also interesting is being able to listen to the wisdom that men and women share about practical and life directions guided by what the faith texts tell us. Some faith leaders hear the voice of those who suffer from intimate partner violence. That's another characteristic that was interesting to me, is the fact that they are willing to listen to what they have to say. And what one minister that I know said that what we need to do is hear and believe what women are telling us associated with that. Other ministers grew up in households where there was domestic violence, and so they witnessed it firsthand. They knew what was occurring. And Bishop Mitchell, for example, said he grew up in a household with it, and he ended up deciding to be a minister. But one of the things that he said was that if you belong to his church, and he has 34 churches that he's responsible for, is that you're going to spend some time addressing domestic violence among the various ministries that his church responds to. And then some faith leaders are called to action on the issue among other issues that they look at. It's enough for them to hear the issue. At LaDonna's church, Bishop Ellis, who's the bishop there, has several churches in the United States, but also around the world. He says, it's my responsibility to be able to address these issues. He's got several generations of pastors in his home, in his life, and from his father to his grandfather. But he was called to do it, and his wife were called to respond to this issue based on the fact that he felt like it's his responsibility to address these issues of people who are parishioners. He developed a battered women's shelter in his church. LaDonna does this training for women who are in the United States, but also all over the world, and she'll get a chance to talk to you about that. Next slide, please. Some faith leaders believe that if you have a social service component to your ministry, and you ask the question, is there something that troubles you? You have to spend some time listening to what people tell you, and you have to respond to that problem. And then some faith leaders are called to action on the issues, again, among the other issues that they respond to. Next slide, please. So here are some references that you can review. There's the Will to Change, and it should be WILL, the number 2, the word change.org. And then you'll notice that there'll be Speaking of Faith that deals with Christianity, but also deals with Islam. You'll listen to roundtables where there are imams and Islamic women that are having discussions about what the Quran has to say associated with it. You'll see a video with Speaking of Faith for the Christians, where there are 4 churches where people are talking about the work that they're doing to address the issue of domestic violence. You'll see a discussion about domestic violence and Islamic men and women having a conversation. But you'll also notice that there's another video which is maybe more difficult to see because there'll be imams who are talking about sets of issues. Some of them are on the right track, but some of them are not. And they're having this conversation with Islamic women as well. And you'll hear the conversations where people agree and disagree. And you'll also notice that there's a video about Christian men and what the Bible tells them about being non-abusive, but for Islamic men and what the responses should be associated with what the Quran directs people to address with regard to domestic violence. So there's a journal of social work and Christianity that Esther Jenkins and I just did a study looking at, with the help of the African American Domestic Peace Project, that provided 112 churches that we surveyed and asked questions about, addressing the issues of domestic violence, and so that's in press. So I direct you to see that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Dr. Andy Johnson at Bethel University.
Thank you, Oliver. Delighted to be here. So I'm going to focus on what the literature tells us about faith and intimate partner violence. Next slide, please. Sometimes in my work, not all mental health professionals realize the advantages that one can have when considering religion and spirituality. Not everyone's religious, not everyone's spiritual, but amongst those who are, sometimes it's a central part of their life. And one of the most important of these I found is in understanding unanticipated barriers. And it turns out in the Hmong community, Hmong survivors of intimate partner violence, one of the biggest barriers that keep them from leaving abusive relationships are religious cultural beliefs surrounding burial. So concerns about burial practices are actually central. And so if you have a Hmong survivor in counseling and you're trying to help her and you don't ask her about her concerns about burial practices, you will be missing the most important barrier to leaving an abusive relationship. Now, when I first heard this, I was rather surprised. I actually had to double and triple check because this was something that was new to me. But one thing that fortunately, I stopped myself early on because I needed to consider the role of context and personal experience. I was raised in an evangelical household where a lot of individuals in the churches I grew up with believe that if the woman just submits enough to the husband, that somehow the violence will magically stop. And if someone's raised in the Hmong community, they would find that the beliefs that I had been raised with to be very unusual as well. So it's really important to consider that within every religious tradition, there are resources available to help survivors of intimate partner violence, resources that can be used to confront abusive partners, but there are also ways in which each tradition has been twisted or can be misused by abusive men and sometimes unwittingly even by religious leaders and making the oppression worse. A second factor I found is that if people are not aware of religious tradition, sometimes it can lead a therapist to minimize abuse and to misunderstand and not understand the severity of an abusive situation going on. A classic example is in the Orthodox Jewish tradition. Orthodox Judaism, there's this real elegance and beauty, and the idea of following Jewish law or halakha is a way of putting one's life into harmony with the universe, right? And with God who created the universe. And it's something that's vitally important to someone who's Orthodox and Jewish. And so just one example of abuse in an Orthodox Jewish relationship from a real life case that's often overlooked by therapists, or it's easy to overlook. And there are other examples too, but there was an individual and he was abusive, engaged in domestic violence, coercive control, and he forced his wife to violate the modesty. And I'm not very good with Hebrew, so I'm going to pass on the pronunciation of the word there for modesty. But what happened is he forced his wife to go out with him to dinner, and he said she doesn't dress sexy enough and things like that. So he made her wear a dress with a little scoop in the neck, and then it was a a longer skirt, but it had a slit in it that just really offended her, and she felt dirty and awful and terrible. But she went, and so he forced her to violate this law. And for many therapists, they might look at the dress and think, well, that really doesn't seem to be very revealing or much of a problem. But for this particular survivor, when she went home that evening, she went and hid in the restroom. She cried bitterly, and she showered herself. For quite a while, she felt deeply ashamed. I mean, these dynamics probably sound familiar to many of you who've dealt with sexual assault victims before, but this was something that was rather serious. And so sometimes within a religious tradition, there can be, be behaviors or actions which have very profound and deep meanings, which may pass over you or pass by you. You may not understand if you don't know a little bit about the tradition itself. So that's one. A third thing to consider is the system does not work well for everyone. There's a long history of this in the States, especially with regards to the African American community. And what I'd like for people to consider is that what's happened historically is that churches have filled the gap a lot of times for when the system has not worked for the African American community. And the classic example of this is the legacy of lynching in the United States. Lynching was a terrible thing, happened after the Civil War and up into the 20th century and so on. I don't want to go into the basics of this, but I, I've read in reports, people say, well, we've noticed that African American women are more likely to turn to religion than to mental health professionals for help. And it's probably because of the cost. It's that because if they had the money, and it's like, no, it's much more than that. Because if you understand, where would somebody turn? Historically, you couldn't turn to the police because sometimes the police were complicit in the lynching itself. And so systems evolved within the churches in terms of providing care and so on when others were not willing or when they were oppressive and so on. So the thing to consider here is that for churches, religious organizations of marginalized groups, your opportunity as a mental health professional, as a shelter and so on, is to go out and make connections with these religious organizations, because this is oftentimes where people want to go to receive help. And you can do a lot of good there. Another example is if you look at intimate partner violence in Latino American churches, and this is even more so in recent years when a lot of the protections that were in place at one time for an immigrant woman to report domestic abuse, and then she would not be deported and things like that. There were assurances of that. Well, this is not in place the way it was at one time. And so you see in these communities, oftentimes there's a tendency for people to prefer informal networks in the church. And it's important for you to work with individuals actively in the community and in the church in order to provide services for these survivors of interpersonal violence. A third thing I would have you consider is that even in the case that Mohavichin Geddes wrote a chapter for me in the first volume, I edited Religion and Men's Violence Against Women. And what they found is that even though there was a church with pastoral leadership, which was sensitive and understanding of domestic violence and things of this nature, that in this multi-ethnic church, the women of African ancestry, directly from Africa, not African American, they were using networks to help them from within the elders of their community and things of that nature, and sometimes from the home country and things like that. So if you're working with a multi-ethnic church and there's a large body of immigrants within the church, you will need to have not only the religious leaders on board, but also the elders within a given tradition. That's important to consider. A final thing that's important, and Oliver's talked about this. I imagine all four of us will talk about this in some ways. Is sometimes even clergy misunderstand scriptures. There's nothing within any of the major religious traditions which allows for gender-based violence, which allows for violence against women. It's just it's not a godly thing to do, regardless of one's religion. But sometimes survivors who are very committed to their religion have heard misinterpretations of the scriptures of their tradition, and they feel caught. They want to be faithful within their religious group, but at the same time, they want the violence to stop, and they sometimes will see an incompatibility. The classic example here is in Islam and intimate partner violence, and there's verse 434 of the Quran. And the context of this verse is that the woman in this case, in this example, has committed nashuz. I can't say it properly, but I think it's something to the effect of nashuz. But whatever it is, it's so bad and it's so immoral, you can't even say what it is. Now, there seems to be some degree of consensus that it's something of a sexual nature. And I've heard one or two imams argue that it's so bad, it's probably not even a real thing that anybody can do. And I don't want to get involved in the debate, but the thing is, it's so suppose someone's wife has done something really, really, really awful, whatever it is. Well, then the process is, in this, and the verses surrounding this, is that first the husband talks with the wife and tries to get her to change. And then if she doesn't change, then he brings someone else. We see this in major traditions. Christianity has a version of this too. Then if that doesn't work, you bring in the pastor and so on. And then finally, if she still doesn't change, he may, and it's a version of the word daraba, uh, and it's not really clear what it means. Some imams have told me it means that he should leave her. Others have suggested that it means that to strike, as with a kerchief or a miswak. A miswak is something that's used as a toothbrush. There's a bush in Saudi Arabia, and there's a little branch, there's a little tuft at the end of it, and people will do that. And they're pretty soft. But the idea is it's a symbolic. It's not even, there's no force at all. It'd be like a piece of Kleenex landing on your arm. Now, some imams have told me that because even doing that is so inconsistent with the teachings of Islam, that you really even shouldn't do that, and so on. But the overall thrust of this, and what I want to get to though, in this case, is that Islam does not condone wife abuse. Unfortunately, sometimes the Arabic is translated to English and other language. The word raba is translated to beat. And so, there's some perpetrators will say, oh, the Quran says I'm allowed to beat my wife, and that's not what it's saying at all. That's not the meaning at all. And sometimes survivors of interpersonal violence will have similar interpretations. But think about it, if she believes that, if the perpetrator believes that, if the man believes that, and the therapist doesn't know, and the therapist believes that, somewhere somebody needs to be aware that Islam does not condone gender-based violence. Next slide, please. In general, there's a wide range of research that's been conducted for decades that show that higher levels of spirituality and religious involvement lead to all types of positive outcomes. And this has been found to be true for domestic violence survivors as well. So we can see on the screen here that there are fewer depressive symptoms associated with high levels of spirituality, religious involvement, fewer post-traumatic stress symptoms, greater levels of social support, increased well-being, and that spiritual well-being is second only to hopefulness in terms of predicting suicide non-attempter status. So the point here is that there's all kinds of research that shows that high levels of spirituality and religious involvement can be healthy. Because if we look at the next slide, there's a classic study by Potter that looked at African-American domestic violence survivors. And Potter found two contradictory effects with this. On one hand, abuse against women by intimate partners is often excused, if not condoned, by clergy. They'll quote Bible verses out of context sometimes, such as wives, submit to your husband, as a form of proof texting, point number 2. And that's from the Christian scriptures, Ephesians 5. But if you look in the context before, it says, husband loves your wives as Christ loved the church. which is the opposite of what a lot of abusive men and even some clergy interpret that verse to mean. It really changes the meaning. And then also says, husbands and wives mutually submit one to another. Then if you look at the greater context and the sociocultural setting of the Roman Empire, the Romani were very misogynistic, extremely hierarchical, and things of this nature. And so sometimes you get these ancient forms of rhetoric which say, okay, go ahead and be hierarchical, but as long as men and women mutually submit one to another and the husband loves the wife the way Christ loved the church. I mean, you do that, you can't, there goes the hierarchy. You can't have that. But sometimes people interpret these things very literally, and out of context, they may take them to mean the opposite of what they actually mean. The third point, though, in contrast to the negative side, is that survivors often use religion and spirituality for resilience. So if we look at the next slide, the vast majority of women in Potter's study relied on spirituality to help them get through and out of abusive relationships. They sensed a closeness to God watching over them, and they continue to rely on their faith. However, unfortunately, most did not seek out assistance from clergy, and those who did were often given, as Oliver mentioned, bad advice. So women who sought help from their pastors became disheartened with their churches during their abusive relationships. They always had faith, but they kind of felt derailed from their religious track. So the general idea here is that if we look on the next slide, we'll find that most women want to receive, Christian women, first and foremost, help from their pastor or their church community. That's what they want. Unfortunately, this is also the place that's rated the least helpful as a resource by abused women. Uh, but this is a really helpful segue. What I recommend is Ludi Green, as she develops domestic violence policies for religious congregations, and this will do a number of things for you. It's the chapter can be where she outlines this most clearly is in my first book on religion and men's violence against women. This does a number of things for you. One is it helps you help a religious congregation to think ahead of time. What are you going to do? Do you know what to do? How do you train people? Where do you refer people? But knowing, as Nancy Nason Clark has found in her research and many people's experience, religious leaders need to know what to do and how to do it. A second thing this will do for you is it will provide an opportunity to develop an ongoing relationship with clergy and so on. Mark McMinn's research is clear. Oftentimes, especially conservative Christian clergy, but you'll find this in other types of clergy too, the trust is a major issue, and we need to know that they can trust you. And so the criteria they use to determine if they should work with you or not may not be the same as your criteria as to whether you would work with someone in the movement to end gender-based violence. But developing trust, helping people know what to do. A third thing it does is it encourages systematic opportunities for ongoing education and training for staff on intimate partner violence. Religious congregations have to think through this and so on. Now, on the last point on this slide, it says, don't refer persons affected by domestic violence to marriage or family therapy. And everybody says this, and I think it's great advice. It's the best advice we have. However, this is not how I pose it to clergy, because clergy a lot of times will say, yes, but I'm trying to save the marriage. And so what I point out instead, first as I focus in on, clergy who are serious about saving marriages should take steps to make the congregation safe for abused women to report the abuse, so that they'll do so earlier in the cycle so they won't be blamed and they won't be marginalized or castigated or what have you, but they're willing to report early in the cycle. And then the abusive behavior of the man is more amenable to treatment, and then the marriage can be saved. Another example of this is I've heard a number of clergy, in fact, most clergy I've talked to uh, have told me at some point that, well, we want to help out, but intimate partner violence just isn't reported that often in our congregation. It's not a problem in our church. It's a problem in all these other churches, or in this group or that group. And the what I usually come back with on that is that, well, violence against women is very prevalent. It's everywhere. So if there are no reports of domestic violence in your church, why is that? It's so pervasive. If your church community is such a safe and supportive environment for abused women, then why isn't your church flooded? So that needs to be reframed for many pastors. If we go to the next slide, I don't have time to discuss how to create a domestic violence policy for your religious congregation, but Ludi Green has that information. You can see some of the steps here on this slide. I did want to make sure you at least had those available to you. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see the next 3 steps in creating a policy. And so the main thing is that you have these on the PDF. Well, thank you very much.
So now we're going to turn to Minister LaDonna Combs.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me this afternoon, and there's been some great things said. I am Evangelist LaDonna Combs from the Greater Grace Temple Church in Detroit, Michigan, where we have about close to now 7,000 members, and where we have a very comprehensive faith-based domestic violence and sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking ministry that we started at Greater Grace Temple because we saw that there was a need for domestic violence prevention. I am a survivor of domestic violence. I was married to a minister in a church, in another mega church. That the church was my family. It was my family's church. And I ended up in a shelter for domestic violence. And back then, there was no resources for Christian women in the shelter, and you could not even pray on shelter property if it was a federally funded area. There was no place that you could even pray for healing or even for any type of solace or meditation. And many of the women who were in the shelter, who were also women of color, and some were not, but were women of color, knew that I went to church and would approach me in the evening when I get back and ask me, if I could pray with them. And it showed me that there were spiritual needs of women who are victims, and that they needed an environment that supported their spirituality. They needed a place to pray, even in shelter, because it was a resource of safety. But they didn't just need physical safety, they also needed emotional safety that went along with their spirituality and their spiritual needs. Because I was in shelter, some of the women in shelter were also married to ministers in other counties. Some were pastors' wives, and they knew that I went to church. And so they would come to me in the evening when I would get back late, and they would say, "Can we pray?" So we would have to find a place in the shelter away from the staff, so that we could have prayer services and we could talk about some of the things that were going on. Because in the African American church, spirituality is very important, because the onus is put on the woman for her spirituality, of how successful her family is, and if she is, if her family is falling apart, and she's a victim of domestic violence, many times traditionally that's associated with her spiritual strength and her ability to pray. And the thing about the church and Christianity, especially in communities of color, the pastors are usually second and third generational pastors, and they do what their fathers did, and their fathers do what their grandfathers did, and that just wasn't addressed. And they have, even though churches today are more secular with technology, the framework around a lot of the ministry is pretty antiquated when it comes to violence prevention for women, because it's not supposed to happen. And they don't understand that domestic violence is not a marital problem that you can counsel away. It's a crime. So they need more training for clergy on how to make women safe in churches. And a lot of the scriptures, as Dr. Johnson and Dr. Williams talked about, that really they use to justify a lot of the behaviors for clergy and for men in the church in Ephesians about the man being the head of the household and being the wife to submit. They don't use the whole scripture. It's almost like looking at a trailer for a movie. You see bits and pieces of the highlights of the trailer, but you don't play out the whole movie so you can see how it's supposed to really happen in the framework around relationships. And so Ephesians is very interesting in our ministry at the church because we talk about wives submitting to their husbands, but we also notice that in Ephesians from verse 25 to 33, the writer also has to tell the man 5 times to love your wife. Not one time does he ever tell the woman to love him. He tells the man to love your wife and to submit to her. She's to submit to him, but he's also to submit to her, but he's also to submit to her as he submits to Christ in love. And he's supposed to submit in love first. And when he submits in love, he has a clear vision of how he's supposed to treat her as he is to treat the church. Because many ministers, they don't talk about the scripture. They need to understand that the interpretations of the Bible, the woman's submission, many times is embedded in clergy and their own inner biases and inner thoughts about women's rights and minimization, and her voice in the church is usually involves all of that. So when you have a domestic violence ministry in the church, you have to have a place that's safe for women to disclose, and that's safe, that know that she can have resources, and that there's a place for her, that she won't be penalized or she won't be minimized for disclosing that those things are happening in her home. The Black church has historically been a place for civil rights, but civil rights also begins in your home. Next slide, please. You also have civil rights in your own home. So what we also in the Black community, being a community of civil rights and of urban communities, and that's what goes on at Greater Grace Temple. We are African American church, and the Sisters Against Abuse Society is a culturally specific domestic violence service. Next slide, please. And so many women of color that are in the church have the same systemic problems as the women that are in the community. The church is located in the community, so anything that's going on in the community also is coming into the church. And the church has to be a place where women have room to disclose the things that are happening in their home. Nancy Nason Clark has also talked about the fact that in religious homes and Christian homes, many women are victimized by their husbands, and these men promise to love and cherish them. Next slide. And that's not happening. And so as a minister, being in the shelter myself and wanting to do training and show clergy, that there needs to be another option for women. In the Black church, historically, divorce is very frowned upon. Next slide. And so if you are someone who's doing ministry, or if you're a therapist, or you're a resource provider, one of the things that you have to understand when you get a woman of faith before you is some of the barriers that she's feeling around receiving services, or the fact that you're going to offer her something that might be against what she fundamentally believes will cause a crisis of faith or put her outside of good standing with God. And a woman of faith in the church who's suffering domestic violence, one thing she's trying to figure out is, what have I done to deserve this? What did I do before I get married? How am I not measuring up to God that this would be happening to me and not happening to someone else? So she's pretty isolated and in what she's doing. And male privilege and spiritual abuse is one of the main things that can happen in churches, especially in Black churches, where the man is the head of the household and he feels like it's his God-given right to make sure everybody in his house is going to church, everybody in his house is spiritual, that she's submitting to him the way she should and appreciative of what he's doing for the family. And when that doesn't happen, depending on his beliefs about power and control, that can result in some terrible things happening to a woman of faith. Next slide, please. So the Sisters Against Abuse Society is a place where victims can come into the church, and we can sit down and we can talk about narratives around cultural beliefs and cultural norms when it comes to the practice of religion of women in the church and what they're suffering from domestic violence. Many women don't believe that they can go to mainstream service providers or that they can go to other therapists because they're taught that if you go outside the church for help, they're going to force you to get a divorce. They're going to force you to do something against your religion for safety. And many service providers who aren't trained to deal with Christian women are going to think, well, you know, the church, I don't know why you go there, because they allow the abuse to happen and they want you to stay in an abusive relationship. The difference is because the victim hasn't had any type of resources or doesn't have dialogue around what's happening to her. She doesn't know how to articulate the abuse in her home to her pastor. And she doesn't know how to articulate the abuse also to the service provider, because to her pastor who's preaching to her and her husband every Sunday, he's paying tithes, she can't go up to him and tell him he's calling her bad words and bad names, and all that preaching that you're doing is not working at her household, you know. And then she needs to go to the service provider and let them know, well, you know, I have gone, to my pastor, and I have gone to other places, but they're not helping me. But the answer for her many times is not to leave her church. So we have to have training, and we have to have policies, and we have to have churches to partner with mainstream organizations and culturally specific organizations to help women understand that it's a journey that they're going to be on for healing, that domestic violence is wrong. There's nothing they can do. They can't pray it out of their house. They can't pay their tithes and leave their house. There's nothing that they can do, but that's a choice of the person that they're married to, and that the scripture does not support those type of behaviors. Those type of things that are happening to her have nothing to do with scripture, but everything to do with the internal beliefs of clergy and lack of training and things that are going on in the home that possess power and control. And so we can do things to help women feel safe. We can do education, we can preach from the pulpit, we can start auxiliaries and ministries, and we can hold men accountable in the church who say that they love the Lord. He can, like the He ministries that we have, the Men of Grace at our church, he can repent, but with repentance comes accountability. He trusts. If he trusts the ministry, then the ministry is responsible for mentoring him and helping him to heal and to unlearn and to relearn acceptable behavior to God. And he will practice walking out this new behavior, and he wins because healing produces a change. We talked about, the church has the ability to keep her safe. It has to be where clergy embraces the full interpretation of the Bible, which also is in Ephesians, but not limited to, and the Old Testament documentations of God using and honoring women all through the Bible. And it refers to the church, like we said, as the female is the bride of Christ without spot or wrinkle. You can advance the slide, please. So with that, we have to understand that our ability to educate our faith leaders, we can either create a bridge for safety and healing, or create a barrier that perpetuates victim blaming or attributing his abuse to her failure as a Christian, creating a crisis of faith for the victim. And that's what puts her in a crisis, her lack of understanding as to why is this happening. Next slide. And so that's what I want you to remember, that these resources have to come to your churches and to your programs, but they can't come without training, ability, and very much.
Thanks, LaDonna. And the next person that's going to present is Elizabeth Peterson. And Elizabeth is going to talk to you about the work that she does in South Africa, all across South Africa, to include faith leaders to address the issues that have sort of interesting ways to engage. One of the things that was interesting when I visited Elizabeth was in the Islamic church, Islamic faith, one of the things that was fascinating was the plays that they put together to train their parishioners around the issue of domestic violence in Islam, and talk to men about how they need to rethink how they interact with their children and their partners. So, Elizabeth, here you go.
Hi. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you for the opportunity. This is really wonderful to be part of this particular webinar. So I'm going to go straight into my presentation by first saying that I got into the work really because of the context within which I grew up. I'm one of 9 children, and in the South African context, you would know that, we come from a history of apartheid, and where faith and violence have really been used to oppress the large majority of the population in South Africa, which is predominantly Black people. But the interesting thing in my context is that I grew up in a home where I've never seen my dad use violence or abuse or shaming, of my mother or any one of us. I'm one of 7 sisters and 2 brothers. And so in my imagination, I could never understand how it is that, how do you get from a place of love and connection with a human being in an intimate relationship to a place where it becomes a place of terror and horror. And then, of course, my own childhood, in my childhood, I always say before I went to church, I had a sense of God and a sense of my calling. And I did not actually know that it mattered that I was in the frame that I was born in, being a woman and non-white, until I actually got to church and I got to school. And so I was always fascinated and thought, how is it? Isn't it an indictment to God? If you get into, if somebody understands what their calling is, but then they are told by the church and by schools that, no, you are somehow limited because you're a woman or you're a man, or the pigmentation that you find your skin in. So anyway, so that is, I just kind of wanted to say that I still believe that we are born, we were created knowing who we are and what our calling is. We are created with knowledge of God, knowledge of our calling, but also knowledge of our agency, that we have the ability to express ourselves and live out our callings in this life. However, when we are born, it's like we are being told what to believe about what we know, and we are taught what to believe about our agency, our ability to live this out. So anyway, and I believe that intimate relationships is really a sacred place, and when that place is whole and complete, each individual should find expression in this life. But let me go into the next slide. So in South Africa, intimate partner abuse is flagged as the most prevalent form of violence against women. And we also know that this is irrespective of the country and religion, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status that we find ourselves in across the globe. But particularly in South Africa, we find that women live in one of the most religious yet most violent societies. And then I'm just reflecting on, albeit unreliable, because of underreporting, it is estimated that 1 in 4 women finds herself in an abusive relationship. And a 2004 study found that a woman was being killed by her intimate partner every 6 hours, and that was, of course, when that particular study was done. And then another stat that says every 26 seconds a woman is being raped by a man. It is also estimated that 90% of the South African population subscribe to religion, to religious beliefs and practice. And so this is what we are sitting with. How do you explain a context where religion and faith is so pervasive, and yet you have so much violence going on? So given that in African societies, religion permeates every aspect of life, it is imperative to explore the intersections between religion, faith, and intimate partner abuse. And research indicates, and I think we've heard it from the other presenters as well, we know that victims and survivors turn to their faith, they turn to their faith leaders and their faith communities for support, but we also know that perpetrators often use scriptures and teachings that are easily misinterpreted to justify their abusive behavior. And so some of the research that I've done, to inform the establishment of SAFI also confirms that in South Africa, like across the globe, faith leaders are often not adequately trained or equipped by their theological training, nor their faith institutions to address intimate partner abuse. And then back in South Africa, we are saying, and scholars and practitioners are saying, that while the rights discourse is an essential democratic value in post-apartheid South Africa, it is not in itself a plausible intervention strategy in contexts where religion that is embedded in culture is a social determinant of hierarchical gender power relations in intimate relationships, families, and society. And so SAFI then was established, South African Faith and Family Institute, short SAFI. We established that organization in 2008 to help address the faith dimensions and root causes of violence against women. Next slide. And so SAFI's mission really is to advance a coordinated, multicultural or multi-sectoral, culturally competent, restorative justice response to violence against women and children by being a resource to religious leaders, institutions, and faith communities as they hold perpetrators accountable and ensure the safety and empowerment of victims and survivors by offering opportunity for truth-telling and healing of individuals and families, and also to challenge from a theological perspective patriarchal traditions and other root causes of intimate partner abuse and violence, which destroys the dignity of women, children, and men. And then thirdly, part of our mission is to encourage the promotion of scriptural and theological teachings that encourages or advances in the intimate relationships that set people free to live their full potential in support of unions. And so our vision as the South African Faith and Family Institute is to see individuals live their full potential in intimate relationships and in families in a society that is free from gender-based violence. Next slide. So what we believe is that if religious leaders are transformed in their thinking about gender power relations from hierarchical to relational, their teaching, preaching, and pastoral care intervention will transform the way women and men relate to one another in intimate relationships, families, and broader society. And we believe that Ubuntu, which is an ancient African philosophy, can serve as a catalyst for such transformation, because we also believe that the philosophy of Ubuntu is really present in all faith traditions. Next slide. So I just want to say something more about Ubuntu as a resource, but also this whole notion of using faith and culture as a resource. So Archbishop Desmond Tutu describes Ubuntu as the essence of being human. It speaks of the fact that my humanity is caught up and is inextricably bound up in yours. I am human because I belong. Ubuntu also speaks about wholeness. It speaks about compassion. Persons with Ubuntu know that they are diminished when others are humiliated. They know that they are diminished when others are oppressed, and they know that they are diminished when others are treated as if they were less than who they are. The quality of Ubuntu gives people resilience, enabling them to survive and emerge still human, despite all efforts to dehumanize them. And also the unity of Ubuntu advocates, is about support for the dignity of human life. And the work of SAFI is about cultivating Ubuntu as we invite religious leaders, of course, from all traditions, to dig deep within their own faith and to really come up with resources from within their own sacred text and teachings in the quest to bring about lasting healing for victims, survivors, perpetrators, children and their families that are affected by this problem. And so SAFI offers the Ubuntu philosophy, which is, like I said earlier, which is present in all faiths, as the safety net in confronting what we also refer to as the Siamese twins of oppression. The Siamese twins, namely white supremacy and patriarchy, that are operative in the systematic and systemic destruction of women, men, children, and families. And so we grapple with, this notion of the Siamese twins of oppression, which we refer to as white supremacy and patriarchy, because we say these two systems of oppression both has captured God in it, because white supremacy is a system of belief that says God created white people to be superior to black people. And patriarchy is also a system of male dominance that has captured God in it, saying that God created men to be superior to women. And so the challenge is really, if God is captured into these belief systems, we argue that it is religious leaders' responsibility to interrogate that and to set the record straight if they believe differently. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So SAFI's strategic objectives is really that SAFI mobilizes religious leaders and faith communities to address the faith dimensions and root causes of violence against women. And so what I want to say there is that we say to religious leaders, we know that victims and survivors of faith, as well as perpetrators, men who abuse their intimate partners, who use faith to justify their abuse, they would sometimes go to service providers or to the police or the justice system, and they would sometimes quote these scriptures. And we cannot expect social workers, the police, or the justice system to clarify scripture. Each one of those sectors have their own area of work. And so it becomes the religious leader's responsibility to demystify easily misinterpreted scriptures and teachings. And so what we then say as SAFI, we exist to help places of worship become true sanctuaries of hope and healing for individuals and families that are affected by domestic violence. And we seek to be a resource to religious leaders and faith communities. I think it's also important to note that historically there's always been tension between the religious sector and the gender-based violence sector or the feminist movement. And what SAFI is saying is that we haven't come to employ the same tools of division and shaming and that blaming, but we are really here to hopefully help create a safe space where faith leaders are able to critically look at not unhelpful teachings, but also draw on resources. And we're also saying that we shouldn't be asking faith, women of faith, or men or perpetrators who struggle with intimate partner abusive tendencies. We shouldn't be asking them to choose between their faith and life, right? So we're saying that faith leaders must, there must be a space for them where they can reflect and begin to draw on and put forward resources from their particular traditions. And so SAFI offers training and technical support. We facilitate opportunity for theological reflection and engagement between various faiths, but also faith-specific and denomination-specific interventions. And then we facilitate opportunity for faith leaders to network and collaborate with government and also other non-profit organizations. And I guess we advocate, I mean, the long and the short is to advocate for legislative reform and culturally informed interventions, you know, and I must say that when I first came to the US on my quest, because I said to God, there must be people somewhere in the world that actually talks about culturally specific interventions and that speaks about faith as a resource. And that was when I met Dr. Oliver Williams, and I was like, oh yes, you know, I knew that there must be people somewhere in the world that speaks about the importance of focusing on culturally specific interventions. Next slide. So just to quickly say, how do we do this? So like I mentioned, that what we have developed is at SAFI is we've developed what we call domestic violence training and capacity strengthening model for religious leaders and faith communities. And we're specifically talking about capacity strengthening instead of capacity building, because we start from the premise that religious leaders and faith communities are already doing the work. And so we want to acknowledge that. And so it's also our approach to say to them that we are coming alongside you to strengthen and possibly help, you know, reflect on how you are doing this and to see where might be blind spots and how might we learn, you know, to find more effective ways of responding to victim survivors and their families. And so I'll just mention some of the pieces of this model. So we do a sensitizer workshop, which is a half-day workshop. We really look at really getting religious leaders to see how women and men are almost groomed, you know, from Sunday school, from children's ministry, youth ministry. By the time that they get into the adulthood, it's almost like we've already been groomed to become victim survivors or perpetrators by the way that, you know, the stories, for example, that's being told. I always ask the Christian pastors, how is it that you've never really taught us about Queen Vashti, you know, but you keep telling us in Sunday school about Queen, what's her name, Esther. And so to become a little bit more aware, and then also stories around Samson, you know, these male images. Why don't you talk about Joseph, you know, in the Sunday school? Why do we keep repeating over generation and generation these stories that really provides or shapes people's theology about who they are, and this then, how that plays out when we then eventually get into intimate relationships and marriages. So anyway, so the sensitizer workshop is there to open up that particular area, and then we have a 5-day training, and then we have a 10-week series, and the 10-week series is built on what has been covered in the sensitizer workshop and the 5-day training. And so that 10-week series is meant to assist the faith leader to now engage the whole congregation. So, for example, there would be a theme that the pastor would preach about, and then the idea is that all the different ministries within his congregation would then talk about that same theme. So in Sunday school, in youth ministry, all the various ministries. What we've also developed is a religious leaders forum on gender-based violence. And so we've established this so far in 3 different communities. So that is a space where faith leaders who have been through SAFTI's training, but also other, maybe some of their colleagues that they want to invite, in those meetings that happens once a month, they get to come and share and exchange and support each other around cases that they may, have dealt with, but also it serves as a self-care space and an ongoing development space for those faith leaders. I now want to just switch to the Theological Advisory Council on Gender-Based Violence, which you can go to the next slide. That, because the majority of the population in South Africa, I mean, it's almost like 80% of the population is Christian, or at least subscribe to Christianity. But we are also a multi-faith society. And so what we are learning is that each faith has a different way of even engaging this particular issue. And so what we have done in 2015, we decided that we need to establish to kind of institutionalize the interfaith or the multi-faith component. We established what we call the Theological Advisory Council on Gender-Based Violence. And we can go to the next slide. And the intention there was really that we wanted to be intentional about getting all or the majority of the faiths part of what we are talking about, and to really get theologians from these various traditions. And you would notice in the slide, the previous slide, we try and get a woman and a male from the different faith traditions so that we can get different perspectives, and not only theological interpretation and perspectives only from male theologians or scholars or religious leaders. And so the objective, and the patron of the Theological Advisory Council, you would notice, is Archbishop Jongonkulu Ngani, Ngani, and he was quite prominent, and he was the Archbishop just after Archbishop Desmond Tutu in the Anglican Church. And the Anglican Church played quite a critical role during the anti-apartheid struggle. And so this is also kind of intentional, how we get most senior religious leaders with a lot of influence to participate in this Theological Advisory Council. And so the objectives of the council is to offer theological guidance and advice around easily misinterpreted scriptures. They meet from time to time, and to reflect on theological, to reflect theologically on also certain themes that come out. So, for example, in our work with religious leaders and faith communities, we have, the whole area around marriage preparation came up. And so we have had a consultation then with the Theological Advisory Council so that these theologians can talk to us from their different faith traditions. How do they address marital preparation? What are the things that they cover in ways to prevent intimate partner abuse and that sort of thing? The next slide. So those are just some pictures of the launch of the Theological Advisory Council, and you can see the different faith traditions. We work across Muslim, Christian, African traditional religion, the Baha'i faith, the Jewish faith, and also the Brahma Kumaris and just various faiths in South Africa, and the Muslim community, of course. And the next slide. Yeah, there's the example of the two publications that that we had produced through the Theological Advisory Council. Next slide. This is an example of how we also involve the Theological Advisory Council to get involved in conferences. And so these are pictures of where we get them to come and speak at public conferences during the 16 days of activism. And so here's an example of what has happened. One of the religious leaders, or two of those religious leaders from the Muslim community, we've involved them in one of our campaigns, Take a Stand campaign, but also one of them serve on the Theological Advisory Council. And what has been interesting, because of the initiative and the work that they've been doing with SAFI, they have now gone, and here the pictures that you see this is their third annual 16 Days of Activism campaign. So within the Muslim community, they are now running their own initiative. Next slide. And so we had a particular conversation around African traditional religion, about the home as a sacred place. And that we find is another very important aspect of the work, because often we speak a lot about other faith traditions, but there's almost a neglect to talk about African traditional religions. And again, drawing from the indigenous knowledges, we find that there are so many resources. And oftentimes when we do speak about domestic violence and we talk about religion in South Africa, the conversation, people often start the conversation by talking of harmful practices. Now, while we know that there may be harmful practices in both faith and culture, SAFI is saying we have to switch the conversation, and we must start by talking of faith and culture as a resource. And then we must allow people from within their own traditions to do their own critique. Next slide. The Jewish community, that has been an amazing catalyst for taking some of their work public into the broader society. When we did something in 2015 and they invited SAFI to come and talk to them about sexual misconduct or about rape. And so we've been having these conversations, or at least that one conversation opened up and got the Jewish community in Cape Town to launch their own campaign. And then I end the presentation with some of the references that you can read up on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, to share some of our ideas and our work. Casey, I turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, Andy and LaDonna, for sharing with us today. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your passion to each of you on this issue. And this dialogue will continue. We will have more topic of conversation on this, both at Alliance for Hope International and in our organizations. I want to encourage you to reach out to each of our presenters if you want to follow up with them. I do want to give a shout out to our International Family Justice Center conference. Each year we host a conference. We have attendees from all over the world. Our conference this next year will be in San Diego, California from May 19th to 21st. We'll be bringing in folks that really have done legacy work, people like Oliver Williams and many others that have been doing this work in the United States for 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years. And we will be recognizing those that have not only done this work for a great deal of time, but those like Elizabeth too that are the next generation. So blessings on each of you. Thank you to our presenters today, and continue to do this work. Take care of yourselves, treat each other with honor and respect, and let's stay committed to that statement of SAFI, that our goal is to provide hope and healing to those in need.